Now that I've reviewed One Hot Minute, the 6th album by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, I shall now do as I've promised. Here is my review of Radiohead's 3rd album, OK Computer. OK Computer was released in 1997. Now, the only history that I know regarding this album is that while Radiohead was going through their Benz tour, they were finding it to be pretty stressful. However, with the critical and commercial success of the band, Radiohead was confident enough to self-produce their follow-up album. Now, not only was Radiohead producing this album, so was Nigel Godrich. This album being produced by Nigel Godrich turned out to be a pretty big deal when it comes to Radiohead's body of work, because starting with OK Computer, Nigel Godrich has been Radiohead's producer up till this very day, as I'm recording this review. Last but not least, most of this album was recorded at St. Catherine's Court. Whether that has any relevance to this album or not, it really doesn't matter. But I just thought I'd point that out. Now, since this is an album review of OK Computer, I am sure anyone that has heard this album can kind of predict what I'm going to think about this album. But if you would like to know my opinion about this album in full, here goes. OK Computer starts off with Airbag. Now, out of all the intros in a Radiohead album, I find OK Computer's intro to be the coolest. I cannot say that Johnny Greenwood's guitar work is fully badass in this track, despite that the first 20 seconds of Airbag does sound badass. I do like how he was reserved for other tracks, where he really shows his full potential. Also, I am pretty sure most Radiohead fans already know the history about Airbag. It was inspired by a car crash that Thom Yorke and his then girlfriend got into back in 1987. That's really the only history surrounding Airbag. There's really nothing more I can say about Airbag. I think it is the coolest opening to a Radiohead album, bar none. OK Computer's opening track then segues into Radiohead's 6.5-minute magnum opus, Paranoid Android. Airbag, Paranoid Android also has a bit of a history. The lyrics were primarily written by Thom Yorke following an unpleasant experience in a Los Angeles bar. According to what I read about Thom Yorke's experience at this LA bar, was that he was surrounded by people high on cocaine.
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
And Thom Yorke even got frightened after a woman got violent after someone spilled a drink on her. And that same night, Thom Yorke couldn't sleep. And that particular woman inspired the lyric, "Kickin' Squealing Gucci Little Piggy." Oddly enough, the music video for Paranoid Android kind of makes fun of this, but plays out a little differently. I would like to argue that this track does blend in very well with OK Computer's themes of social alienation and emotional isolation. And I've always interpreted Paranoid Android as a song that features depression, anger, a bit of happiness, even a little suicidal. But despite my interpretations before I knew the history of what Paranoid Android was inspired by, I still am fascinated by what inspired this track. As silly as that sounds, and regardless of my interpretation, it still became one of Radiohead's greatest songs. If there are any anime fans watching this review, I'll have you know that the sci-fi dystopian cyberpunk anime, Ergo Proxy, features Paranoid Android as its closing theme. Now, I've already said this in my review of Pablo Honey, that Ergo Proxy was my gateway to Radiohead. Now, despite that I've already said that, I will say something else for this review. Thank you, Ergo Proxy. By the way, if you ask me, I think Ergo Proxy is an interesting series. If you have not seen Ergo Proxy, give it a shot. Back when I reviewed Radiohead's second album, The Bends, I gave a shout out to my friend Brogan, who was very fond of that album, which led me to listen to it out of curiosity. I am very sure he would want me to mention what Paranoid Android was named after. It was named after Marvin, the Paranoid Android, a character from Douglas Adams's classic science fiction novel, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Fantastic.
Paranoid Android, without a doubt, is the highlight of OK Computer, and I must confess, I've heard this song about 100 times, and I never get tired of it. I like how anxious this track feels at first, followed by Johnny Greenwood's badass guitar solo. And what follows Johnny Greenwood's electrifying guitar solo is the Rain Down on Me segment, which calms the track down, only to be followed by a chaotic climax that really puts the cherry on top. I kid you not, Paranoid Android is one of my favorite songs ever. And now that I've rambled on about Paranoid Android more than enough, I shall proceed in talking about the rest of OK Computer. Subterranean Homesick Alien is a nice change of pace when it comes to this album's flow, considering the sounds from the previous two tracks being heavy at times. Also, the title of this track is an homage to Bob Dylan's Subterranean Homesick Blues. Also, this track is not subtle at all with its theme of alienation. After all, one of the themes of OK Computer is social alienation. What I appreciate about this track is that even though it has to do with alienation, I like how happy that this track does sound, even though the lyrics really are kind of depressing. Oddly enough, even though this track has to do with alienation, this track actually sounds pretty calming, and I think that really fits in pretty well with what the track is about. What follows Subterranean Homesick Alien is one of the most unnerving tracks in OK Computer. Exit music for a film.
Wake from your sleep.
The title, as well as the entire track itself, bears a connection with the 1996 film adaptation of William Shakespeare's tragic love story, Romeo and Juliet. Now, please make note that the film adaptation I'm referring to is the loose adaptation starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes. Feel free to do your research on that particular adaptation, because I'm not going to do a history lesson regarding that film, but maybe I'll talk about that particular film someday. I just don't want to go in detail about that particular adaptation for this review. I do know that this track was used at the end of that particular film, so that's all I know. As for what I think about this track, I like the simplistic sound of its acoustic guitar, followed by some eerie sounds, which is all leading up to a bone-chilling and dark climax. Exit music for a film segues into its next track, Let Down. Now, Let Down is a little complicated to talk about, but I have two interpretations for this track. I may be wrong, but like I said, this is my interpretation of this particular track because, like I said, it's complicated. I have always interpreted this track as someone struggling to find meaning in life, or someone disappointed with our modern society. Doesn't matter if you're in the UK or in the United States, I think that's just something like that in general. But there's also a lyric, one day I'm gonna grow wings, something, 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 which has that hopeful, optimistic outlook. So I like how Let Down has some juxtapositioning going on. Even though Let Down does sound blissful, even with its blunt lyrics, I know there are Radiohead fans out there that love this track. And guess what? I do too. What follows is Karma Police. Now, this track, as well as its lyrics, does sound a bit political. Now, from what I've read about this track and its history, parts of the lyrics are a joke, according to Radiohead. And if that's the case, well, I've been dying to use this joke. Tommy York stated that Karma Police was about stress and people looking you in that malicious way, and that he couldn't handle it anymore. And also parts of Karma Police share themes of insanity and dissatisfaction with capitalism. As for what I think about the track, it's great, it's catchy, and I love that chaotic mental breakdown of a climax. This, of course, leads into the next track, Fitter Happier, and to anyone that has heard this album would already know that Fitter Happier is not a song. This is the one with the computer voice.
Fitter, happier, more productive, comfortable, not drinking too much.
What I do know about Fitter Happier is that the computer voice was done by Tom York on his Mac computer. And if you hear the piano in the background of this track, that piano was also played by Tom York while he was in a rehearsal room while being drunk, very drunk. And it became a part of Fitter Happier. And the reason Fitter Happier exists for this album, according to Tom York, is that some days you're in a disturbed state and it moves to the front. And it actually fits in with OK Computer. It then segues into its next track, Electioneering. Now, before I talk about this track any further, allow me to make something very clear. Just because a band or a music artist dislikes a song does not dictate how much I like or dislike a song, especially the one in question. The same applies to fans. And the reason I say this is because Electioneering is regarded as the weakest track in OK Computer. I don't know why, because I personally liked it just as much as all the other tracks that came before and since. As for what I think of the track, it's a catchy riot, and it's even got a cowbell.
I gotta have more cowbell.
Climbing Up the Walls is by far the most disturbing track in this album, because it hits the mental high note in OK Computer. Its lyrics are demented and disturbing. It even has an insane climax, which also includes Tom York screaming at the top of his lungs, with a demented climax. This particular track does send shivers down my spine. And I think this track is effective for doing that, because it does fit in with the themes of OK Computer. What follows that disturbing track is No Surprises, which is brilliantly placed considering how demented the previous tracks sound, and this track sounding happy, even though the lyrics are depressing and blunt. When I first heard No Surprises, I thought this track was about suicide, but after listening to it a few more times, I started picking up that perhaps maybe the track is about the speaker being unhappy with the world. Now, I could argue that the song could be about suicide as well, but I suppose it's up for you to decide what the track is really about, because they never really explicitly said what this track was about. But I guess those two outcomes I thought may be my best guess. If the listener resonates with this track, they might find No Surprises to be an emotional track. It really does depend on the listener, but regardless, I still think it's a great track in the album. The penultimate track, Lucky, is when OK Computer started to sound a little bit happier amidst all the depression, anxiety, and chaos in the 10 tracks that preceded it. It's also a pretty solid penultimate track, if you ask me. But then came The Tourist, the final track of OK Computer. Now, I do think The Tourist puts OK Computer in full circle, considering the first track, Airbag, has lyrics such as, "In a fast German car, I'm amazed I survived. An airbag saved my life." While The Tourist has lyrics such as, "Hey man, slow down. Idiot, slow down." So some people may argue that The Tourist makes OK Computer an album that just loops over and over endlessly. But I would argue that the ding that ends this album kind of debunks that theory, because I understand The Tourist as a track that's reflecting on a car crash, but the speaker is anxious that it may happen again. And the ding is what I would consider to be a sign that things are going to be okay and there's nothing to worry about. But that's just my guess. The Tourist is a wonderful conclusion to a damn good album. Overall, OK Computer is much more thematic than its predecessors, and the instrumentation in this entire album is top-notch. The songs are listenable, the lyrics may be cryptic, but it also gives a high replay value. OK Computer is without a doubt not only one of the greatest albums from the 90s, it is one of the greatest albums of all time. It is a bona fide masterpiece. But it's not the only bona fide masterpiece Radiohead has made in their entire discography. Oh no, there's another. I really don't need to explain what rating I'm giving this album because I think you know pretty damn well what rating I'm going to give OK Computer. So I'm not going to say it. If you like this review, feel free to hit the like button. And if you want to follow my channel, please feel free to hit the subscribe button. And if you want to request any bands or music artists that you would like me to review in the future, please leave the request down in the comment section down below. And as always, you're welcome to leave me a comment if you feel so inclined. And thanks for watching. Oh, fine. It is an obligation to my channel anyway. By the way, this is a Dalek mug.